Howdy folks, welcome to module 15 of the CompTIA A course. This module is called Managing Linux and Mac Operating System. Please note though folks that this module will be a wee bit shorter compared to some of the other modules in this course. Alright, let's just get right to the agenda of this course or this module since it's going to be such a short module. There's only two main sections that we'll be covering in this specific module folks. The first section is Identify Features of Linux. The second section is Identify Features of Mac Operating System. Like usual folks, this is the part where you give the video a like. Well, only if you want to, but I would appreciate if you guys do that. Remember to also subscribe if you'd like to know when the other modules for this course goes live, or if I have other videos that goes live for other courses, of course. Alrighty, on to that first section of this module, which is Identify Features of Linux. The first thing we're going to talk about in this section is shells, terminals, and consoles. So starting with shells and terminals, shell, for those of you that don't know this yet, is a command interpreter. The shell provides a command environment by which a user can operate the operating system and applications. Many shell programs are available to use within Linux, notably Bash, ZSH, and KSH. These shells expose the same core command set but are distinguished by support for features such as command history, tab completion, which is very useful, let me tell you that much, command spelling correction, oh who doesn't need that, or syntax highlighting. Now as for terminals, you get many kinds of terminals folks on many different platforms and operating systems. But on Linux, when it comes to terminals, it's basically a user interface for a shell. Many Linux distros are deployed with no desktop environment. The boot process launches a terminal user interface connected to the default shell command interpreter. The terminal and shell are connected to the default shell command interpreter. The terminal and shell are connected by a teletype device that handles text input and output in separate streams. Pretty complicated, let me tell you that much. Something else we need to talk about on this topic is desktop environments, folks. Linux distros designed for use as client PCs typically load a graphical desktop environment at startup. The graphical environment is driven by an open source version of the X window display system called Zorg, or just X. Hope I didn't butcher that name, the Zorg name. I think most folks just call this X, because it's easier. I know I'm one of them. Various desktop programs can be launched within X. Examples of this include Genome, KDE, Cinnamon, and XFCE. Within a desktop environment, you can open a terminal emulator to use the default command shell or alternative shell if needed. The terminal emulator runs within a window on the desktop. A last thing we need to talk about here on this list is console switching. When a graphical environment is installed, the X server occupies one of the virtual TTY consoles. Typically this would be TTY1 for those of you that don't know. The Ctrl-Alt-FX keys can be used to switch between consoles in case you don't know how to do that. Each console can support a different login prompt and shell, which is going to be very useful if you need to work on more than one at the same time. Alrighty, let's move on to the next topic, command interface. So in this topic, the first thing I'll mention is case sensitivity. Commands, parameters, and file and directory names are all case sensitive in Linux, guys. You folks will see sometimes commands are nearly identical, but differ literally by just something like a little blank space between some of the letters or something, and that would literally result in a completely different result. It's extremely important you folks type commands exactly the way they're supposed to be typed. So to say these things are extremely case sensitive would probably be an understatement. If I had to list the amount of times stuff did not work for me or did not work correctly for me simply because I made a small little typo, I literally just made too many spaces or something, I would never finish the day if I had to make a list that long. Now, since Linux is not always going to be your friend, and since you're sometimes going to need some help, let's face it, we're all going to need some help, that brings us to getting help. A Linux command reports its function and syntax when executed with the --help option. The help is often several pages long, folks, so it's common to pipe the output to the more command. So when I say more, that's an actual command, folks. The more command, let me say it slowly, that's a command, will show results a page at a time, which might help you a little bit, if you're a bit on a pinch. It's going to make things a little bit easier and smoother for you. Alternatively, folks, you can use the man. Yes, that's a command. You can use the man to view the help pages for a particular command. This is also a pretty nifty trick or command that might prove useful to you when you find yourself in a pinch. Next, we have file editors. Most Linux files use a plain text format, folks, and can easily be edited directly. There are numerous file editors you can go and use. The Nano text editor is a basic example, often preferred by those coming from a Windows environment, like most of us, including myself. I prefer to use Nano because why? I prefer to use Windows. Not saying one operating system is better than the other, because I'm not going to go and promote or demote anything here. I'm simply stating that I'm a Windows fan, and Nano is the one I prefer to go and use. So to open or create a file, just use Nano. Now besides this Nano I've just mentioned that I prefer to go and use, some administrators, this is probably the guys that favor, Linux, they will prefer to use something called Vi or Vim. Anyway, let's move on to our next topic, navigation commands. Now, when it comes to this topic, the first thing I want to mention to you folks is everything available to Linux is represented as a file in a unified file system. Some folks just call this UFS for short. For example, first fixed disk would normally be represented in the file system by /def/SDA. A second storage device, perhaps one attached to a USB port, would normally be represented as /des/SDB. When Linux boots, a system kernel and virtual file system are loaded to a RAM drive. The unified file system identifies the location of the persistent root partition from the appropriate storage device and loads the file system stored on the disk. Unlike Windows, folks, Linux does not use drive letters like drive C or drive D, stuff you guys might be familiar with if you're using Windows. The unified file system starts at the root, which is represented by a /. Directories and subdirectories can be created from the root to store files. Linux's file system's hierarchy standard specifies how directories under root should be named and where types of files should be placed. For example, the /home directory contains subdirectories for each user to store personal data, and the /etc directory contains configuration files. I suppose some folks might just say /ect, however you want to go and pronounce that. The core commands that you should know to navigate the Linux file system are commands like, for example, the pwd command. In short, one could say this command will list the current directory, but to add on to that, for those of you that don't know a bit of Linux, the pwd command prints the working directory. Now, if that sounds confusing, printing will typically mean it displays it on the terminal, folks. That's what they mean by printing. We also have the cd command, which in short will be just to change directory. Cd is used to change the working directory. Then we also have the is command, however you want to go and pronounce that. I just call it is command, which basically lists the directory content. This is command lists the contents of a directory in a similar way to the dir at the Windows command prompt. Lastly, folks, we have the cat command, which is used to output file contents. Cat returns the contents of the files listed as arguments. So that about covers it for navigation commands. Now let's take a look at search commands. The first one is the find command, which does pretty much what the name suggests, folks. It's a file search tool of sorts. Not much to say about this command besides saying that it's used to search for, well, files. We also have the grep command. This one I find interesting because unlike the previous tool I just mentioned, which basically just searches for files, this grep command is used to search the contents of files, and it doesn't stop there, folks. It can also filter the contents. Pretty nifty, right? Now tell me that's not useful. Now here we have file management commands, folks. As you'd probably expect, file management commands are used to, well, move, copy, and delete data. If you look at the cp command, cp is used to create a copy of files either in the same or a different directory with the same or different name. This is basically the same as the copy command you folks would find in the Windows operating systems, come to think of it. Looking at the mv command, this command is used to either move files from one directory to another or, well, rename a file. Once again, this is similar to Windows if you compare it to the cut command on Windows. On Windows, the copy and cut commands normally keep the name the same though, but with Linux I've seen the name will not necessarily stay the same. You actually have the option to change the name when you move or copy these files. We also have the rm command. This command can be used to delete files. It can also actually be used with the -r option to delete directories, mind you. Lastly, folks, we have the df and the du commands. These commands check free space and report usage by the device, directory, or file specified as the argument. The df command enables you to view the device's free space, file system, total size, space used, percentage value of the space used, and mount point. The du command displays how a device is used, including the size of directory trees and files within those trees, obviously. Well, folks, believe it or not, that is the end of the first section of this module. Very short, very quick. The good news is very little of the stuff in this module is actually in the exam. Heck, most of you folks probably won't get any questions about this module in the exam, if I'm being perfectly honest. Some of the modules in this course are very long, some of them are very short. Some of the modules in this course have a lot of questions about them in the exam. Some only have a few questions about them in the exam, and then you have got modules like this one where there's hardly any, if any, questions about this module in the exam. That doesn't mean this module is not important, and I suppose you guys can still use this module as informative. See it as informative for the work environment, for those of you that may or may not be working with some of this stuff. Now, from the next module in this course, being module 16, there we'll start covering a lot of stuff again, folks, which is in fact going to be in the exam. So it's very important you guys review module 16. Maybe not so much this one, but module 16, yes, that one's very important for anyone who wishes to go and write the CompTIA A+ exams. Anyway, let me not hold you guys. Let's move on to the second and the last main section in this module, which is identify features of Mac operating system. Now, first up in this section of the course, we have interface features. Let's start with menu bar and dock. If you're using an Apple Mac computer for the first time, folks, you will notice that the desktop and the user interface is like a Windows-based computer in some respects, but also different in other respects. Just like Windows, a Mac boots to a graphical desktop environment, something you guys might be familiar with. Any apps that you have installed and configured to launch will also boot at start. At the top of the screen is the menu bar, folks. This is always present with all apps, but the menu title changes to show commands for the active window that you're actually on at that moment. To the left of the menu bar is the Apple menu. This can be used to report support information and to log out or shut down the computer. Now, as for dock, what is that? In case you folks don't know what that is, the dock at the bottom of the screen gives you one-click access to your apps and files, similar to the taskbar in Windows. Apps that are open in dock display as a dot below the icon. In short, folks, the dock very much is the same as taskbar that you would see at the bottom of the Windows operating system. It does, however, have a few differences, like I just mentioned. Now, regarding features, you also get something called Spotlight, folks. It's basically, in short, a search feature in a nutshell. The Spotlight search can be used to find almost anything on the Mac operating system, which is very much the same as the search function you would find on a Windows operating system. So if you were to go and look at an operating system like Windows 10 or Windows 11, this is probably going to be the equivalent to Cortana. So Cortana is the search function which is built into Windows 10 and Windows 11, if you had to go and do a comparison. We also have Terminal. You'd remember this is actually something we briefly spoke about earlier in this module in the Linux side of things. The terminal can be used to access the command line environment, which uses either the Z shell, in other words, ZSH for short, or Bash. Older Mac operating system versions uses Bash, while if you look at ZSH, this is the default from Catalina and up. Lastly, folks, we also have something called Mission Control and multiple desktops. I love the name for this, it just sounds really cool. The Mission Control feature is used for window management, enables the user to set up multiple desktops with different sets of apps, background, and so on. I don't know about you guys, but this certainly sounds like something useful in my books. It's a geek's dream. Okay, moving on to system preferences of Mac operating system. Let's start you guys off with Apple keyboards. Where PC and Linux keyboards use Control, Alt, Alt-GR, and Smart modifier keys, Mac keyboards have an Apple/Power key and Command, Option, and Control keys. Command is basically the closest you'll get to Control key in terms of functionality, if we go look at a Windows machine, and the Option key is usually mapped to Alt. You're going to use the keyboard pane in system preferences, folks, to map keys if you're using a non-Apple keyboard to operate a Mac machine. And believe me, there is many users out there that are going to try and use a non-Apple keyboard on an Apple machine. So you're probably going to end up doing this more often than you would like. Then we also have Apple Magic Mouse and trackpad and gesture support. Macs, guys, do not support touchscreen interfaces, but they do, however, support gesture-enabled Magic Mouse and Magic Trackpad peripherals. If you'd like to see what gestures are available on Mac, or if you just want to change any of the settings, just open the trackpad pref pane, folks. Now moving on to displays. The displays pref pane allows you to scale the desktop, set the brightness level, calibrate to a given color profile, and configure night shift settings to make the display adapt to ambient light conditions. Pretty much what most cell phones do these days, come to think of it. Lastly, on this list, folks, we have accessibility. The accessibility pref pane is used to configure assistive vision and sound options such as voiceover, narration of screen elements, cursor size. Yes, there's people that actually want to change cursor size, and motion settings, zoom tools, display contrast and font sizes, and let's not forget captioning. Alrighty, moving on to our next topic, security and user management. First up, we have Apple ID, folks. Each local account on the device can be associated with an Apple ID. This Apple ID, folks, is used for purchases from the App Store if you'd like to go and do that. It's used for accessing iCloud and other functions, of course. There is actually a very good chance that a user may already have an Apple ID from previous iTunes purchases that they may or may not have made. And if you had, let's say, an iOS device, something like an Apple phone, there is a good chance that you might actually have an Apple ID already. And in case you're wondering, you can sign in and out of your Apple ID using the button on the System Preferences homepage. Next, folks, we have privacy. Just like with Windows machines, Mac operating systems has an option to configure what analytics or telemetry data and personalized information can be collected. Plus, permissions for apps to use features such as the location service, or camera, or data stores such as contracts and calendars. So it's very much the same as a Windows machine in those aspects. You folks can, if needed, go and adjust these options via the security and privacy pref pane, which looks something like the picture you'll see here on the right. Now moving on to internet accounts and keychain. The internet accounts pref pane, for those of you folks that don't know, can be used to associate other email and cloud accounts with your login. The keychain helps you to manage passwords for these accounts, other websites, and Wi-Fi networks. This feature is also available as iCloud Keychain, which makes the same password securely available across all Mac operating systems and all iOS devices. The keychain makes password management much easier, but occasionally it does have problems that might happen. Lastly, folks, we have something called File Vault. Now, the name alone should tell you this has got something to do with security, and I suppose the menu we're on should also tell you that. So File Vault, for those of you that don't know, is a disk encryption product. As most of you already know, encryption is a great way to protect against any weasel and his uncle that wants to get their greasy hands on your device or your data. The data is encrypted. And if someone, God forbid, happens to get their hands on your device, they can't do anything with it because the data is encrypted. Now, moving on to our next topic with Mac operating system, Finder and iCloud. As with Windows, a Mac can store files on local drives, but cloud storage can represent a more secure option and make it easier to synchronize data between devices. The Finder, folks, is the Mac operating system equivalent of File Explorer in Windows. So for those of you that's using Windows, whenever you just go and browse your folders, or you click on that little folder icon down below on your taskbar to go and browse your music, your videos, your games, all that kind of stuff, that, folks, is the File Explorer. Now, Finder on the Mac side of the coin is pretty much the equivalent. It lets the user navigate all the files and folders on a Mac. It is always present and it's always open in the dock. On the Windows side, you'll find the File Explorer is always open and running in the background as well. Now, as for iCloud, iCloud is Apple's online storage solution for its users. It provided a central shared location for mail, contacts, calendar, photos, notes, reminders, and so on across Mac operating system and iOS devices. It's kind of like a OneDrive. If you go and compare this to Windows, it's like a Dropbox, a Google Drive, a OneDrive, except this is kind of built into the Apple devices. So yeah, there is that convenience factor. By default, each user is provided with 5 gigs of storage on this Mac storage location. At least that is what it was the last time I checked. I haven't checked this in a while, to be honest with you guys. It's probably still 5 gig, but yeah, don't take my word for it. You might want to go and double check that. It's not an exam question, folks, so don't worry about that. Alrighty, moving on. So firstly, folks, there are two main distribution mechanisms for Mac operating system apps. These are the App Store and app downloads. So that's the two ones. So starting with the App Store, or should I say installation from the App Store, the App Store provides a central portal for Apple and developers to distribute free and paid for software. Now, if I have to compare this to something on the Windows side, this will be like the Windows Store. So with most Windows machines these days, especially the higher end editions, you'll find it's like a little shopping bag icon on your taskbar, and that is normally the Windows Store. It's a guaranteed safe place for you to go and download softwares. Some of them cost money, some of them don't. You can get movies there, you can get games there, but at least it is a safe place. The App Store is basically equivalent, but on the Apple side of the coin. It is also used to distribute updates to Mac operating system and new releases of the operating system. So that's slightly different because Windows would normally get this via Windows updates. Access to the App Store is, however, mediated by an Apple ID though, like I've mentioned multiple times before. So whenever we talk about the App Store, guys, if you do not have an Apple ID, if you're not signed into one, good luck, it ain't gonna happen. So as soon as we start talking about the Apple App Store, folks, you ain't going to get nothing done without that Apple ID. Now, luckily for you guys, the Apple Store is not the only way to get yourself an app. You can also look at just downloading apps, which Apple calls the installation of download apps. The apps you can download are pretty much the same as the usual apps, folks, which you'd expect. These will be apps like, if I have to thumb suck it, those will be apps like Microsoft Office, Adobe Creative Cloud, and Skype. Well, I suppose these days we call it Microsoft Teams, but you get the idea. There is something I want you folks to pay close attention to here, though. Usually, when you go to a vendor website to download an app of your choice, most apps tend to download a Windows version and not an Apple version. When you go to a Windows website, make absolutely sure you download the Apple version. Otherwise, well, I don't think I need to explain what's going to happen then. It's just not going to work. It's not compatible. Now, speaking of downloading the correct version, there are two main Mac operating system package installer formats you need to know of. The first is DMG. This format is used for simple installs where the package contents just need to be copied to the application folder. The second is PKG format, which is used where app setup needs to perform additional actions, such as running a service or writing files to multiple folders. If you folks find yourself in a situation where you need to uninstall an app on your device or the device of one of your users, the good news is for any app, the uninstallation process is simply to use the Finder to delete the .app directory or to, well, drag it to the trash. Also, since we're talking about apps, we have the topic of the antivirus. Just like any other operating system and platform, Mac operating system also has its fair share of vulnerabilities which can be taken advantage of course. With all operating systems, it's always very important to have some sort of antivirus. It's also very important to keep that antivirus up to date. I mean, it doesn't help you much you've got one, but you never update it. So yeah, make sure you keep it up to date, folks. When it comes to computer security on an Apple device, the basic key security rules apply, folks. Download preferably only from trusted sources and download only trusted content. As soon as you start deviating from that and you start going to some sketchy website and you start downloading some sketchy stuff, well, folks, then you're on your own. There's nothing I can do about that. That's not a way I can put that. You're on your own. Alright, and then lastly on this list, folks, I have to mention corporate restrictions. Mac operating system, along with many other installations, can be enrolled into something like an MDM. For those of you that don't remember what an MDM is, since this is actually something I have discussed in the previous module, an MDM is short for Mobile Device Management. You get many softwares out there which classifies MDMs, but the main one which most folks go and use is a Microsoft one called Microsoft Intune. It's probably the most widely and the most commonly used one out there. So using Intune, you and a company can enforce restrictions on devices and users. You can basically choose what they can and what they can't do on these devices, regardless of where these people are, regardless of where these devices are and what they are. You can control any device anywhere, anytime. And as I've said in the previous modules, that kind of sounds like hacking. So to prevent this from being hacking, the catch is these devices normally needs to be enrolled into your company's Intune environment. You can think of this as giving you permission to manage these devices. How you enroll these devices, guys, that's up to you. There's a million and one ways. The most common way and the easiest way is normally when you provision the person's machine when you're about to give it to them for the first time. You know, normally when you're about to go and install Windows or whatever, and you give them the updates and the drivers and the programs and the blah 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 that they need, that is the best opportunity to go and use to enroll it into Intune. But there's other ways you can get the job done as well. Alright folks, moving on with our list of topics, operating system and app updates. So, in the Mac operating system, the App Store checks daily for new updates, patches, and releases of installed applications. If a new version is available of something, a notification will be shown against the App Store icon in the dock. Hopefully you've been logged in with your Apple ID. You will have a choice then to either update the apps individually or to update them all from the button at the bottom. Pretty convenient if you ask me. It is recommended though to choose update all, which is pretty much what I would have done, so that the latest versions of your apps and updates to your Mac operating system are on the Mac. It is also possible to automatically update apps to the latest version, folks. To do that, you just go to the App Store and then Preferences. There you just go and configure the appropriate settings, and ta-da, you are done. It really is that quick and easy, folks. Most apps that are downloaded and installed from a third-party developer will usually automatically check if updates are available each time they run. It is actually weird these days if these apps don't do that, quite frankly. Usually a prompt will be displayed to update, and then you just click on either update or cancel in most cases, guys. Like expected, it is also possible to, of course, check manually for updates using the Check for Updates menu option in the app itself. Alright, folks, let's move on to the topic of device and network settings of Mac. Starting with the network side of things, you can manage network settings either from the status menu on the right hand side of the menu bar or via system preferences. Just like a Windows machine, you can also join Mac devices to a Wi-Fi network, and the same goes, of course, for a wired network. If you want to configure settings like IP addresses, use the advanced button to configure IP properties and, of course, proxy settings. When it comes to printers and scanners, not much I can say here, folks, besides for you to just use the printers and scanners pref pane to add and manage print and scan devices. It's really that simple. When it comes to disk utility, the disk utility app, folks, can be used to verify or repair a disk or a file system. It can also be used to, well, erase a disk with security options in case you are selling or passing on a Mac, if you are into that kind of thing. Generally, folks, there is no need to regularly defragment a Mac's hard drive. It is possible to run a defragmentation, but it is something that you'll hardly ever do. Lastly, folks, optical drives and remote disk. Believe it or not, since 2016, no Apple Mac has been sold with an internal optical drive. It's just not going to happen anymore. While an external USB drive can be used, another option here, guys, might be just to remote disk app, which lets the user access a CD or a DVD drive on another Mac or a Windows computer. Pretty cool, right? So instead of using something like remote desktop or whatever, which is normally a Windows tool, to access another remote desktop somewhere, this is to basically hijack someone's CD or DVD ROM, for lack of a better description, and use it. So this does not have to be on your machine. If another bloke nearby has a Mac machine or a Windows machine even that happens to have an optical drive, you can go and remote to that machine and use that. Really cool, right? Well, folks, guess what? We're now moving on to the last topic of this module. It really has been a short module, and I know it sounds mean, but I'm glad this is such a short module, folks. The previous module of this course, which I did a video for, really did a number on me. I mean, if you guys watched that module, you would know it was an insanely long module, more than 2 hours long. It was super long with a lot of content. So yeah, this short module is very welcome. From the next module being module 16, it's going to be a little bit longer again, and that module is going to have a lot of content in it, which is very important for the exam. So any of you guys that needs to go write the exam, once again, I'm going to remind you that module has got a lot of stuff in it which you need to know for the exam. Make sure you watch module 16. Anyway, let's move on. So guys, here's the last topic: time machine backup. There's a picture on the right of what it would more or less look like. The time machine pref pane enables data to be backed up to an external drive, or partition actually. By default, folks, the time machine actually keeps hourly backups for the past 24 hours, daily backups for a month, and weekly backups for all previous months. When the drive used to store backups becomes full, time machines start removing all their backups to free up some space. So it works very much the same as a car's dash cam, if any of you guys have ever seen that. There's a lot of computers that does the same concept with backup. So eventually when the backup destination becomes full, it's going to start overwriting some of the oldest backups. Not your newer ones. It's going to go check which ones are the oldest ones. Those ones basically get overwritten first. And then eventually all the backups are going to be overwritten at some point. And it's just going to start the whole cycle all over again, of course. Right, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this module, this short module. If you've learned something, give the video a like. If you have not, it's not in the world. This is a short module, which is not that important for the exam. I would appreciate it if you guys still give the video a like, though. If you'd like to know when the other modules comes out for this course or the other courses, like usual, I'm going to ask you guys to subscribe. Otherwise, you might miss that. And then, guys, that usual special thank you and shout out to all of you guys that's been sponsoring this channel so much. Here's a list of the Patreons currently as things stand. Thank you very much, all of you guys. I appreciate it when you guys became Patreons. Here's the list of the guys that's been sponsoring me via PayPal. Thank you very much, guys. And then also thank you to all of those of you that's been clicking on the thanks button below the video or just buying me a coffee. If any of you guys want to sponsor the channel, you can find all of that information in the video description down below. If you would like to join my Discord server, guys, that you can also find in the video description down below. It's a free Discord server called Free IT Training. It's a community of IT people like myself where we help one another study. If you're studying, feel free to go and join that community. And for those of you that's looking for some questions or any tests that you can go and use to practice for the exam, once we finished all 20 modules of this course, I will go and make a couple of dedicated videos which will have questions, not the actual questions from the exam because that's not allowed, but I'll give you guys a couple of practice questions completely for free to help you guys prepare for the exam. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, guys, see you in the next module, which is module 16 of the CompTIA A+ course.